I do want to bring in Harley Lippman, a foreign policy expert, to talk more about the situation developing there in Gaza between Israel and the Palestinians, but also what to expect from Netanyahu's speech that is expected to begin here in a matter of moments. Harley, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
My pleasure, Josh.
All right, so before we get into the speech itself, the one question that I want to ask you is one that so many people have, and it's all related to a Palestinian state, because we know that several people there in the United Nations, several European countries have said that they are now going to recognize a Palestinian state. Can you explain for folks out there, in your expertise and opinion here, what the reasoning is behind folks saying, no, that shouldn't happen?
Well, I'll qualify that, and I'll go into that in a moment. You can have a Palestinian nation, but what kind of Palestinian nation will it look like? We've had that in Gaza. It's more or less a Palestinian nation, and it's been there for about 15 years. And what kind of nation is that? It's a radical Islamist country that sole mission is to destroy another whole country and to destroy another people. This is not my opinion. This is written in their manifesto. This is central to what they believe in. So this is very different. All those nations that want to vote for a Palestinian nation, I suspect would never vote for a nation on their border that's determined to destroy them. And the proof of it is what we all know is October 7th. What happened on October 7th was dramatically new in the Middle East. This wasn't about dispute over some land or a two-state solution. This was about genocide against the Jews. When you hear the word genocide, look for projection. The only real genocide taking place was what the Palestinians were trying to commit upon the Israelis on October 7th. They killed every single child, baby, elderly man, elderly woman, elderly people crippled in wheelchairs. They set them on fire and had their families watch. They burned families alive. They tortured women repeatedly while they were repeatedly raped and tortured. This is what they did. So, and by the way, these people on the border of Gaza who are attacked are the most pro-Palestinian supporters of the Israeli population. I want to emphasize that. These people vote overwhelmingly to support leftist candidates and support Palestinians and their right to a nation. And look what happened to them. So the message to Israel is clear. This isn't about two states. This is about one state where Israel disappears. So for Israel, even though right now they look strong militarily, they're bombing Gaza, Israel is terrified. Their existence is at huge risk in the Arab world. That's the big theme here. And you may say, well, Palestinians today feel differently. They may feel bad about October 7th, or they may regret it, or say they won't do it. The opposite has happened. There are many, many surveys taking place. The majority of the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank support Hamas and say they would do it again. The leaders of Hamas said they would do it again. So tell me what would be accomplished if you recognize a Palestinian nation and then you're going to go to war again to destroy Israel. How would anyone expect Israel to just accept that? Now, if I could go into something else, you may say, well, what could be the conditions for a Palestinian nation? Now, there are conditions for a Palestinian nation. And Israel has gone to the peace table 6 times in the last 30 years to negotiate a two-state solution. So Israel is not against a Palestinian nation. They're against it now because it would reward terrorism. It would send a message to Hamas that raping, murdering, and taking people from their beds in a kibbutz while they're screaming, calling their mother on the cell phone saying, I'm being kidnapped. Yes, you don't want to reward that, because Hamas even said, look at all these countries recognizing us as a Palestinian nation. They said it wouldn't have happened without October 7th. So if you reward that terrorism, and this is what Bibi Netanyahu will speak about, I believe, in his UN speech coming up, you're sending a signal to all these radical Islamist groups and all extremist groups around the world that murder and killing and rape and torture pays off, because then they're going to get a nation out of it. And that can't be the message. That would be absolutely destructive. So a Palestinian nation could take place if the following things took place. One, there's accountable government. Second, there's a de-radicalization in the schools. These kids are brainwashed to hate since they're young. They're taught math where if you have 10 Jews and you kill 8, how many do you have left? That's how they're taught math. If you have demilitarization, you take away weapons that could be used to fire rockets into Israel. If you implement certain themes like that, then yes, you can have a Palestinian nation. But no one's saying that. And that obviously will not occur if you just have a Palestinian nation, because Hamas is in power and the Palestinian Authority is in power in the West Bank, and they're dictatorships. So I think that there can be a Palestinian nation, but you have to establish under what conditions. And Israel would accept that if you had those conditions. Right now, when Abbas spoke at the UN through a video teleprompter, he was wearing a pin. His pin said right of return. Right of return is a code for the destruction of Israel, because it means all the Palestinians could go back to Israel, where Israel is now. And if Israel is flooded with millions of Palestinians, they'll swamp the Israeli nation and Israel is over. So he is not, his pen was so revealing as to his intentions. And that's what this is all about at the end of the day. The Arab world wants to destroy Israel. Israel makes up 0.03% of the Middle East. There are 21 Arab nations, 54 Muslim-dominated nations. The Jewish people have a right to one tiny nation of their own in the Middle East.
And you are taking a live look here outside of the United Nations headquarters. You can see dozens of folks have shown up to protest the appearance by Netanyahu, as well as the war in Gaza. They are calling, of course, for a Palestinian state. And again, you can see dozens of people there as Netanyahu is expected to speak here in just under 5 minutes. Now, I did want to ask you, because you touched on what Netanyahu is expected to cover here. Obviously, the Gaza war, he's going to talk about a Palestinian state, likely going to address those European leaders who say that they will recognize a Palestinian state here. Could Netanyahu use this to maybe shift the narrative on Israel's role in the region or counter the growing isolation, so to speak?
Well, it's going to be very hard for Israel to do that. I suspect what he'll speak about is how outrageous the proclamation of these European nations are. Why? Because they didn't set any conditions. What's shocking to the world, the civilized world, is that they didn't say, which is what you would think they would have said, yes, we want to recognize a Palestinian nation if you release the hostages immediately, if Hamas disarms. If they were to say that, that makes sense. But they're basically an arm of Hamas. They're doing exactly what Hamas wants. How could they call for a Palestinian nation without calling for the release of these poor innocent people who are being tortured every day in dark tunnels in Gaza for now 2 years? It's reckless, it's irresponsible, and it speaks to their fear of their Muslim communities in their countries. And you know, what I would say if I were to speak to the British in particular, I'd say 77 years ago, you ended your imperialist colonial rule of the Middle East. So you have no right to dictate to the people of the Middle East how they should live. The conflict in the Middle East is going to be determined by the Palestinians and the Israelis with the oversight and guidance of President Trump and the United States. And that's the only way you're going to make peace. On the good news side, Abbas said something truthful in his speech yesterday. He said that there's been over 1,000 resolutions calling for support or a Palestinian nation at the UN, and none of them have been implemented. So at the end of the day, those countries are powerless. They have really no influence in the Middle East. The influence will come from President Trump, who has a vision, who's at least trying to create peace in the Middle East, taking risk. and I think has some great ideas on how we can make a win for the Palestinians, a win for Israel by addressing its security needs and taking care of the security concerns and the relationship of the Gulf nations of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates.
All right. Harley, thank you so much. We are now at 9 o'clock here on the East Coast. That is when the speech is expected to start, and they've been starting on time. So, Harley, thank you again for taking the time to join us and provide your expertise and opinion there. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.